Very nice seeing you, Doshi. So,
My
for
pleasure.
everyone will know you, but I will still introduce you. So, we're speaking with Balkrishna Doshi today, architect, urbanist, thinker, artist as well. And I'm so happy to have you here, Doshi, today. My name is Matteo Kries. I'm the director of the Vitra Design Museum.
Yes.
And we had a full exhibition with you, Doshi, last year at the Vitra Design Museum.
Yeah.
And the exhibition would currently be shown at the Architecture Center in Vienna.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus, we cannot see it at the moment. But I have news because we heard today that the exhibition can be reopened in Vienna on June 1st. So
Oh, that's very
everyone
good.
among the audience who happens to be in Vienna over summer can see the exhibition again. Or if we're allowed to travel again, I think that will be a wonderful occasion.
No, no,
But
I'm sure.
we have an occasion today to speak through this incredible medium, Instagram, live talk. It's magic. So first of all, Doshi, tell us and the audience, how are you? How is the current situation in the lockdown for you personally? And how are you experiencing the situation in India?
Matthew, this is a privilege that I am in front of you and talking through this medium. And I'm so glad that Vitra has reviving all these conversations and even the exhibition will happen soon. That shows, that the situation is not absolutely out of control. It is getting under control. And everybody will be very happy when all this goes away and we are back again in our normal life, exciting and pondering, working together, thinking about something. And I'm particularly glad that you are arranging this meeting today and a conversation. And I think it's very appropriate. It has been a sudden shock for all of us.
Mm.
Suddenly there was silence. But I tell you, for me, that silence, sitting in the garden and not hearing any engine sound, no conference, no telephones, no currents, no radios, and everybody was a standstill. And I wonder if that kind of a silence prevails, and it must be prevailing some other time. How wonderful it is, when you look into the sky and when you see these big kites, the birds flying with their horizontal wings and almost connecting with the currents of the air. And they were so relaxed and they were so natural and obvious, as if, the whole sky and the universe belonged to them. And I was just thinking that cannot we try to get such a thing without coronavirus? Is it not possible that we have also some time for us, some movement, when we can reflect? Are we really going to plan tomorrow and the day after and the day after and the day after? And for what purpose? What price? And I think this is what I was thinking about, that sometimes, like we had, in the Christian world, Sunday was created for this, the Sabbath. That one day you will have no light, you will have no fire, you will have nothing, and you had silence to sit down and wonder. And I think this is precisely what I was thinking, that our generations past, the wise men thought about this, that someday we must have time for us to go inside and connect to our inner consciousness. That consciousness which never appears up. We are too busy with everything. And I think that consciousness is what we are supposed to be. Getting inspired, thinking about beautiful sounds, beautiful hymns, and connecting deep within. And I'm so glad that you are raising those questions. So thank you, Matthew. That is wonderful.
I think every time that something unexpected is happening, something that shows you that you cannot plan certain things, you are linked back to the questions of your mind. No, that
That's right.
you have to be able to adapt and to imagine change. And these days, there's a lot of discussion about issues that have been very dramatic before
Yes.
Corona, will remain dramatic, like climate change, political tensions. And this crisis now is showing us that we are able to change drastically within a few days. So why shouldn't we be able to make changes for other purposes, which are equally important?
You know, the question is we can change, but we are so disconnected and we have so much engulfed with our idea of future. Not only future, but we are not talking about time. We have no more conscious about that silence and that timelessness, that infinity where you have nothing to think about. We are now talking about losing time, which we don't own. We are losing all our energies, the spaces, the places, and things like that, which we don't own. And we are all the time living in that illusion. And I am sure, you know, when you go and you know also how Indians and even the ancient people were meditating and getting back to this system of going within. I think those are the kind of questions, you know, that come back, that what is it? What is it that is the community that we live? If you go now to the old city of Ahmedabad and walk into that city of silence, of course, with the lockdown, we can't go much, but you can imagine. When you go there and you wonder that pace of life, walking on foot, connecting people, having somebody to chat, then you go and sit down and look into those trees and say, oh, what did you say tomorrow? What are you doing? And we are talking about something which has no returns. It's only a friendship. It's a connection with our inner being. And I think those things, you know, I would like really to find out and work out again and see what kind of a plan can we make. Is there a plan that you make, or do you create life that you want to create? And I think building had become slowly a machine. Our life has become a product. I think we should remove these two things and start thinking about something which is only an intangible, which we just sit, imagine, and then let the building appear, let the spaces appear, let the connections appear with the sunrise, with the shadows, with the songs of the birds or the whispering of the trees or the blossom, so that we can really understand what it is and we will become more aware about ourself. I think we also have a biological entity, but where is that gone? And I think that is something which I thought you are trying to talk about, and I would love to really discuss this.
Well, the thoughts that you are mentioning about uh, our general ways of perceiving and interacting, I think have also been a very important foundation for your work as an architect and as an urbanist.
Yes.
Especially, I think, in urbanism, in creating cities, uh, there is a central importance for creating connections between people and allowing exchange and creating public space. What are you thinking currently in this situation where there is no such thing as a public space because public space is made by people? What do you think as an urbanist about this? How can we regain this after the...
Yeah, Matthew, the question that comes up is that I was in Rome, I was in Pompeii years ago, and I saw Pompeii after the deluge, after the whole thing that happened. And I saw the bodies of the people and the places and the rooms and everything, and all in silence. So one is to know that there is a kind of life which is full of love, full of joy, and full of the human spirit, which talks about stories, which talks about ideas, it talks about nuances, and the kind of dreams that we have, dreams of life, not returns, but sharing dreams, sharing the unknown, and sharing the intangible. But anyway, if that was the case, and if that is what is there, I was just thinking that in the cities that we are talking, is it not possible to really come back to this kind of issues? Because today what has happened is we have become completely unconscious about time or space or energy, and we are talking of marketing. We are talking as a product. And I think the product is not required, the process is required, the intentions are required. And I think if I have to do something, I would talk about what is the intent of a city? What is the intent of a family sitting together and chatting, and suddenly a visitor comes near the entrance, and then you get up and you talk to him and spend some time, and maybe you can have dinner or lunch, and then he goes away, and the memories linger. And those memories which linger give us new thoughts, new ideas, new things to create. I think those things, are what I am thinking about. For example, it is possible, and what you're asking, the other question is, during this period, what is the situation in Ahmedabad? I was going to tell you, in the old city of Ahmedabad, on Sundays and other days, it is so crowded with people around, and with little things, selling pins and paper and clothes and shirts and whatnot, or on their hand, or some of the shops which are there, and you can't walk there, but you see people from all over, not really from our housing areas. They were all people from the peripheries. Many of them were there which had nothing. Those who were selling nothing at all, but even the flowers or the kind of things that they were selling, you wonder, because that is the first time you touch those things. You touch them, talk to them, bargain them, listen to or get the fragrance. And then, you rejoice with them that end. Now, that is really the event which happened. The second thing is that Manik Chowk, you remember that perhaps, that place when it is empty, it completely gets transformed. On every single day, that place around 7:30 in the evening, people start changing it, and it becomes a place of eating and dining and sitting and chatting. And in another 2-3 hours, you will find several thousand people gathered there. They will be eating and talking and chatting, and it becomes a place of great pleasure, great memory, as compared to the other places. Now, therefore, when the things are empty in India, they celebrate life. They completely change. They become joyous. They don't know who you are, what you are, but they want to converse. They want to discover. They want to share. And I think those things come back when the places are absolutely empty. So I'm very sure after this is over and then lockout is gone, then I think what is going to happen is that people, again, it will come back to life. So what happens is, buildings, when we are living there, they appear to be almost dead. But when they are empty and we visit them, they seem to be talking. The walls and windows and doors and breeze and the light, they all talk. This is really what I found. This is
I think that's a very beautiful thought, and also a thought that gives a very positive and hopeful twist for a lot of people who might also suffer and have sorrows in the current situation. But I think this idea of being able to see our cities, or the places that we inhabit, in a different manner when they are empty, I think is a very beautiful thought. It reminds me of something that I perceived when I entered your house the first time. It was last year in Ahmedabad, and I didn't see anyone, but I heard someone singing a song.
Yes,
And I think it was your
my
wife,
wife.
maybe, or some
Yes,
relatives. That was really beautiful because the normal thing you would hear is a radio or,
yes,
some artificial music. But it's so rare, at least in Europe, that you enter a house and you hear people actually singing and playing an instrument. So that was a very strong impression, especially when I was not seeing anyone. So the house was in full
yes,
life.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Um,
Well,
you were,
one thing I want to say that the other thing that I realize is that when you heard that, the space became alive because you had not expected into that space. And I think this is where the architects have to understand that when we design, will the space go or speak or tell us another story which is not expected. Suppose suddenly Corbusier, when he came to India, the only thing he mentioned was, in India, I have seen the birds flying through the house and going across. And that is what he did, in the Milonas building or in Indian buildings. But important thing for me was the presence of a surprise movement of a bird whom you don't expect, except a cage or on the trees, passing through from there as if that it owned that space. I think how much one can do with their life. And when you have an air-conditioned room, completely closed with the glass, it's not the at all. It becomes still. It becomes almost dead silent.
Doshi, I was just speaking about the unexpected. You were mentioning we are in this very unexpected and unforeseeable situation. And when
Yes.
reading your wonderful biography, which I can warmly
Yes.
recommend to everyone, I also repeatedly saw that, the unexpected in your life and those unforeseeable encounters with certain characters that influenced you was a very important topic within your life. So I think there is the importance of what you cannot plan. You just have to be open for those happenings. And this brings me back in time. So if we do a little travel back in time to your early days as an architect, how did you? It's easy to speak about the unexpected when you look at it from the past, but when you're in it, how is it? How did it work for you when meeting, going to
No,
Bombay,
actually,
to London?
whenever I look back at my life, at the opportunity that I got to meet people like you and Rolf, and then the exhibition at Vitra, has made me even more and more aware about chance, about surprise occasions. And in India, as we say, it is a question of destiny and how the destiny takes you where you are supposed to go. And I think this is my path. I was not intending to become an architect, and I became an architect because the painting teacher was telling me that you go there because eventually you will be successful and have some money. And then I go to architecture, and after third year, my other friend says, fourth year, I'm going to London and I'm going to appear for the RIB exam. Why don't you come there and then you can appear from there? And I go to London. In London, when I'm there, a couple of people are talking about the conference in Hoddesdon of the Inter-Siam Congress. And so I go there without knowing why I'm going there. And then I meet Corbusier by chance. So my whole life has been all the time extremely favorable chances. And I believe that actually if you are open, if you are listening to yourself when you are silent, the doors open to you and they guide you where you have to go. I am also, of course, a religious Indian person. So the question is that I can believe in it and therefore it is. And my practice happened and the exhibition at Vitra happened. So all the things that have happened, they have been successfully leading from one to the other to the third and the fourth. The only thing which I kept in my mind was I was inspired by Corbusier, Corbusier was inspired by Michelangelo, and therefore my heights or my attempt was to find out what are those currents which make them create what they thought in their mind. And I think when one begins to think about it, one doesn't remain a creator, one becomes an instrument. And whenever I try to design or whenever I did those buildings and those housing and what you saw in the exhibition, which was incidentally was completely planned and curated by my granddaughter Khushnu. And
Yes.
she did that, and she did that as a landscape and not as an exhibition. Now, why it was done as a landscape? Because it becomes obvious that you never make an attempt to show who you are. Let glimpses of them talk. So when the silence speaks, creation happens. In a garden, and then when you see the buildings or when you see things around, you wonder, how many things are revealed to you. And I think this is something which architecture, the great architecture have done, the great musicians have done this. So the point we should talk about, perhaps, if there is a time, that how creativity and celebration. When we design buildings, we design them as product. When we practice as business but I think that is not the purpose.
To get back to these earlier years in your work as an architect, you started in the early 1950s, and then you had this famous period in Le Corbusier's studio, and then you started off your own practice, which you called Vastushilpa very early on. And then you established the Vastushilpa Foundation. Can you tell us some thoughts about this idea behind Vastushilpa as a thought that you followed?
Sure. When I started the Vastushilpa, then I started and established a school of architecture. And the school of architecture became another area where the student could learn, the student could discover, and we could have a debate on what we are talking about. So as a result, the idea was, is there any way that we can disseminate this idea? And very similar to Corbusier's foundation, we could have a foundation, and that is how Vastushilpa Foundation. Now, Vastushilpa was an extension of academia, and that academia and I think was a unique combination, and it added a documentation and research on the history of architecture in Ahmedabad or in the region or in India. And that also was then sent to all the schools of architecture in India to document historical buildings, and they would present that every year in their gathering at NASA, National Association of Students of Architecture, and eventually that would become an idea of awareness about what are the historical buildings in India or in the region and what do they mean. I think the whole idea of foundation was to revive this and add on another dimension of quality of life that we are talking about, where you talk about all classes of people, but particularly the migrants and the people, who stay and live on the pavements. Now, what do you do about them? And eventually, then you talk not only about the rag picker, but you start talking about how does one do minimum cost housing or cost which is the self-built houses. So how does one create habitat? How does one really go beyond and touch the people for whom we have no much exposure? And I think this is something which I think we need to do, because our life, we cannot be isolated. And real meaning of habitat is really give everybody a place to live. Consequentially, you find employment, you find discovery of new materials to use, and you change your perceptions of what really habitat. Well, the whole idea was that gradually we have to be more effective with others. And that is how I got into housing, public housing, and eventually I ended up doing Aranya, of which you know. And I think all those other projects that I did were from Sangat, which I designed as our own office. And I think this is really how my practice continued. But it began with teaching. And I think the whole idea is, how do we become participant in the evolution of the society? And is there any way that we can discover for ourselves the really sense of what habitat means? What is the way we can affect people so that they really not work the way other people design for them the house, but they live into their home? How does house become a home? And how does that home begins to say, this is the extension of my life, my thought, my ideas?
How did you try to reach that? I mean, you got these influences from masters like Louis Kahn, Buckminster Fuller, but then you are also deeply rooted, as we notice when speaking, in Indian culture and philosophy. How did you blend that?
Well, I was, my uncle-in-law was a great scholar of Indian culture. And so I started talking to him about, in the beginning of my career, of what is the meaning of a house or a home. And he explained to me how activities get fused into the sense of space, and how those spaces get connected to the society at large. And so he used the word Vastu, the environment. And that environment is something which is created. And that was the time I became more sensitive, because particularly of Corbusier was about the light and space and form, and also with Kahn about the structure. Mm-hmm. When I worked with Kahn, in Ahmedabad, he first asked that question, that what is this institute for, and what is learning? And he gave many talks on education, on learning, on discovering things. And that was the time one lady asked him a question about, can you tell me something about architecture? And the next day he came back and he says, I don't know what you are asking me, but it is like creating a building which talks about the kind of boat or a ship or something, the meaning of that it is. So I think he was trying to really say that architecture is not really separate, but it is an entity which is integrated. When I was teaching in Philadelphia, I had a chance to meet Dr. Stella Cramrish, one of the world's most known authority on Indian architecture, and particularly that Hindu temples. So I was fascinated, and I was asking her a question, why Indian buildings, the temples, have a very voluptuous form which goes like this, turns around. And I was wondering whether it was the whim of the place or it was some idea. And then she said to me that you have no idea what temple is about. And then she said that those columns which are there and which you see the configuration, there is something to do with a dialogue between them, light and shadow, and then the energy that the columns have. And then she said that before the temple and the god's statue is consecrated there, the entire room has to be energized. And that energized room is what the spirit is. And that is reflected in the columns and outside. And so when you go to the column and when you go into the temple, and if you spend some time, you will feel the energy. From that day onwards, I understood that really, if we want to connect our activity, our life, our thoughts, we must connect with that energy, which is the hidden consciousness. And I think then our insights become better. So those insights perhaps must have given me a thought of talking about the housing that I did in Aranya and how the participation became very essential. I think this is really what the story is.
Well, you were mentioning the column, which I think is
The columns in the South Indian temples.
yes, and I think that's a very important element in your work. If we think about, for example, the Institute of Management in Bangalore,
Yeah,
those beautiful, thin, long columns that
I am Bangalore, yes.
into something where you want to learn, no? You are open to learn, and it's
Yes.
a learning.
Yeah. So I think, that architecture really is a living organism. And if we can think like this, then we talk about the building, and then we talk about relationship of buildings together, the plinths together, and then eventually we talk about a normal larger formation of the cluster, and then we talk about lifestyle and living, and then we see how that impacts the quality of relationships between the community, and how communities then begin to become much more meaningful and in a much larger context. And I think that is where I think the ancient cities were talking about. The
And you,
ancient cities' orientation, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa and others, that there is an orientation, there is a relationship to lifestyle, to services, to connection to activities, and then those activities really inspired people to become creative, and that creativity was very important, and that was the one which was worshipped. And I think that whole connection is what we are talking about. How do we create sacredness and a continuity so that our thought process becomes very positive and very worthwhile? And I think that is where I come back to this whole thing of the corona period, the lockdown, that in that lockdown, how do you really get into that spirit of silence, but that silence is extremely subtle and extremely alive. And I think if we can get those things together, then I think we can create another situation, not necessarily with the virus, but in our planning, that there are moments of activities and there are moments of pause. And then there are moments when there is a time for reflection. And then if you look at the public space like in the mosque or in the cities, then how does that larger space becomes most effective to a larger population? And so it is really a message to the whole society at large. And that is how then it becomes a city plan.
when you worked on projects like Aranya, for example, um, there were also, you were speaking about research that you were doing at Vastushilpa.
Yes.
How did research happen? Did you speak to the communities, to the future inhabitants? What
Well,
was the
I had done that time lot of housing, and when I was doing those, I went to those places, and I went to many slums in Ahmedabad and other places, even in Bombay. And then you begin to see that those slums, when you meet them together, they are talking with lot of positive energy. Because they want to live, they want to rejoice, they want to celebrate. And I think at that time, one doesn't talk about dimensions, but one talks about the quality of space, the quality of light, the quality of communication, and the tightness, which community begins to become one and not separate. I think all those things, became very, very significant for me in my work. Even when I was doing Sangha building, that dimensioning and the positioning and the rhythm within themselves. And I think you were once asking me about the vault construction. When I was doing Sangat, it was really the purpose of creating a real sustainable building where the energy is used minimum, the mechanical energy. So orientation became very important. The reflection on the sunlight with the use of China mosaic became very important. The kind of light that I got from the northern side was very important. The kind of double walls that I made to create storage as well as insulation, incidentally, that came from Kant's thing. The first drawing that I made of vault, etc., and the figure, I did that drawing and I felt I was drawing like my guru, Louis Kahn. And I think this is really what it is. So for me as an Indian, I believe that there is always somebody else operating for you. You are not the one doing it. There is a guide. And that guide is when you let loose that charcoal on a tracing paper and allow it to flow, automatically everything happens. And I think true architecture is like that, and it is not connected to anything else but your inner thought, inner spirit. And I think those are the things, that I learned from these two gurus. And this is really what I would like to say, that have somebody, but have that kind of lightness in your work, in your feeling, so that those feelings will eventually take you where you are supposed to go. And that is your destination.
Thank you very much, Doshi.
Thank you.
I think this lightness is very present in the Sangat building. It's somehow it feels very timeless, and it looks unseen. To me, it's really something that it has elements one may have seen elsewhere, but on the other hand, the whole structure, the whole feeling of that place is something that is completely no? The combination of all the feelings, the little park around, it's a new thing that you cannot invent, I think. It's something that has to emerge. Doshi, I propose let's leave it like that. I think what you mentioned about Sangat was so enlightening in the last comment that I think it's a wonderful closing remark.
I want to also thank the audience, thank everybody, and particularly you and Vitra Foundation, that this is the first time that we are trying to create communication of discovering, experiencing, and learning. And I think if we can create these kind of dialogues with few other architects or even in the schools, I think one would learn a lot more, because these tools and these technologies are extremely useful. And I think your participation and your initiative will be great. And incidentally, I want to also thank you again for the book. And the book really is miraculous and wonderful thing. Yes, that's right. Beautifully done. And of course, it was Khushnu who managed, to get these things done. I can never understand from where she discovered all the things, and she has done that. So I would like at this moment to say thanks to my granddaughter Khushnu, who is the director of the foundation. And never in my career I had such a book as a great presentation to a grandfather by a granddaughter. Thank you.
Thank you, Doshi. I totally agree. This collaboration
and of course, also, you were equally participant. And that I have to say, because without you, this would not have happened.
Thank you, Doshi. Thanks a lot. This project with you and Khushnu as a curator of the exhibition was really a very special project in my career in the museum and also for all our team. So it was really a special moment in our museum's history. And also this talk, I think I agree that if we can continue this kind of exchange, even in the next weeks over the lockdown, when people do not have other means to communicate, I think there were more than 1,000 people listening to this talk today. So it's when can you ever reach so many?
Thank you so much. Yeah.
It's a global.
Maybe we must continue this, and during this lockdown period, be a worthwhile thing talking about education, Indian condition, other places. It will be very good. Let's do it.
Yeah.
With great pleasure.
We open a little university online. Thank you, Doshi, so much. And thank you again also to Khushnu Hoof for curating the exhibition that you will be able to see in the Architekturzentrum in Vienna from 1st June onwards again. And meanwhile, you can read the book and order it. And thank you again, Doshi, so much for
Thanks a lot.
talk and the conversation. Let's continue it soon. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.